Welcome to the Rise to Intimacy podcast. I'm your host, Valerie McDonald, and for over a decade, I've worked as a sex and couples therapist because intimacy used to feel really overwhelming for me. I felt a lot of pressure to perform, I was disconnected from my body, and I often felt like desire was out of reach for me. But through my own trauma work, I stopped checking out of my body and started feeling connected to it again. I learned what it's like to experience intimacy without fear, without shutting down, and without numbing out. Now I'm on a mission to help you do the same thing. This podcast exists because trauma doesn't get the last word. You can learn how to calm your body, change the story you've been carrying, and rebuild real connection. First with yourself and then with the people you love. Let's begin. Today I'm going to talk about scheduling sex. So about half the couples I work with think scheduling sex is the answer to their problem, and the other half thinks that it's the reason they'll never want to have sex again. Some couples have told me that scheduling sex sucks out all the excitement of anticipation, whereas others tell me it's been the best way for them to ensure they'll have sex when they're otherwise busy with work or running around with the kids. But it's really not as simple as thinking that scheduling sex will absolutely be the thing that fixes your sex life. And it also doesn't mean it's not an option you should never consider. And if any of this sounds like your relationship, this is exactly the kind of work I do in my 6-month couples program. If you're interested in that, you can head over to risettointimacy.com and book a consultation with me today. So, of course, I'm going to talk about some of the research behind why scheduling sex can legitimately help. And then I'm going to talk about the pushback I hear from clients, the stuff that doesn't just show up in a cute Instagram reel. And then, if scheduling sex has ever made things worse for you instead of better, I'm going to tell you why and what you can do instead. So, let's talk about a belief most of us picked up somewhere along the way. And that's that we've been sold this idea that real desire should be spontaneous, that if you have to plan for sex, something's already wrong with your relationship. But I'm going to push back on that some because the research also pushes back on it. So Esther Perel has written a lot about this, and her argument is pretty simple. She says that spontaneity in a long-term relationship is mostly a myth, and that it's not a requirement for good sex. And treating it like one sets up couples to fail. In her words, committed sex tends to work better when it's intentional, not just when it's left up to chance. And Emily Nagoski, who wrote the extremely helpful book called Come As You Are, has a name for the belief that good sex only comes from spontaneous sex. She calls it the fairy godmother myth, meaning that if you loved your partner enough, desire would just show up on its own, right on cue, with no effort required. Like a fairy godmother who just waves her wand and all of a sudden, both people are magically ready to have sex right away. But that belief is exactly what turns scheduled sex into something that feels like a test in the first place. If you think desire is supposed to appear out of nowhere, then having to plan for it feels like proof that something isn't right with your relationship. But what I want you to consider is that scheduling sex doesn't have to feel rigid or suck all the romance and passion out of it. Instead, I'd like you to think about how scheduling sex can protect your time for something that tends to get deprioritized by literally everything else on your calendar. Again, like your kids' after-school activities, or visiting with family, or doing work after hours, or any number of other responsibilities we have. And if you've listened to my episode on desire discrepancy, a good reminder here is that different desire levels between partners are normal, especially the longer you're in a committed relationship. Scheduling sex is often less about fixing a mismatch in your desire, and it's more about prioritizing time for connection when your life is already full. So let's talk about why scheduling actually works for a lot of couples. As I just mentioned, most people, especially in longer relationships, start to experience something called responsive desire. That means arousal that often comes after you start and not before. So you don't feel like it, and then you start touching or making out, and somewhere along the way, desire shows up. So, scheduling sex can allow your body a chance to catch up to something it wasn't feeling desire for yet. But remember, responsive desire is not the same as someone who genuinely isn't consenting to sex for various reasons. So, please don't use that knowledge to pressure your partner or yourself. The goal of a scheduled block isn't to expect that arousal or sex is guaranteed to happen during this time. Instead, it's to have a protected time where you give attention to intimately connecting with your partner. And contrary to popular belief, intimate connection doesn't just mean you're having penetrative sex. So the point of the calendar slot is to connect in a way that feels intimate to both of you and to give you an opportunity to be more creative with ways you can do this. Emily Nagoski also found that scheduling sex can actually lower pressure, but only if the couple agrees ahead of time that this time guarantees opportunity, not a specific outcome. And Esther Perel makes a similar point, but from a different angle. She says planning removes the burden from any one person to just magically be in the mood on command. And for many people, having a structure and predictability can lower their anxiety around sex. This is especially true if you're a highly anxious person or neurodivergent. Clear expectations can feel like relief, not pressure, when the alternative is constant ambiguity about whether tonight's the night sex will finally happen. Now, the part most sex-positive content conveniently skips is that scheduling sex can feel like an obligation and not a choice. And I totally get that. Putting sex on your calendar can feel like signing a contract you have to adhere to, no matter how you feel when the time comes. And if this is how it feels for you, it can increase performance pressure that scheduling was supposed to get rid of. And if you're someone who feels like scheduling kills the fun of not knowing when sex will happen, that's real too. But the fix there is less about ditching the schedule and more about building anticipation into the time between now and then. This can be something like flirting throughout the day by sending a sexy text. And all of that can restore some of the mystery scheduling seems to remove. So another pushback I hear is that scheduling increases anticipatory anxiety. And that one's a bit sneakier because that anxious buildup doesn't just wait until the scheduled time. It can start building when you first wake up or even days before your scheduled time. And then by the time the moment comes, you've already spent hours bracing for it. And that really defeats the entire purpose. And for men who experience this type of anxiety, performance pressure can absolutely increase with scheduled sex because they're already worried about pleasing their partner and if they'll be able to get or maintain an erection. So scheduling sex can cause them to start ruminating on their performance way before the scheduled time occurs. And this pattern actually has a name. It's called psychogenic erectile dysfunction, and it shows up more often than people realize. Attraction is fully there, but the anxiety about performing on schedule ends up creating the very problem the person's afraid of. And there's also a version of this for women. Women can experience generalized anxiety around the scheduled time and then become distracted and really have a hard time being present when the moment finally arrives. So going back to Emily Nagoski's work, she uses the analogy of a car's accelerator or brake in terms of what provokes sexual desire. She says that anxiety, no matter where it comes from, functions as a brake. And no amount of accelerator, meaning no amount of attraction or love or good intentions, can override a brake that's already pressed down. So if any of that sounds familiar, especially the anticipatory anxiety, go back and listen to my episode on the pursue-withdrawal dynamic. That tension before scheduled sex often parallels what the withdrawing partner experiences in that pattern. Now let me give a brief note on how scheduled sex may impact a person with a trauma history. For a trauma survivor, a scheduled block may not feel like an invitation to connect intimately. It can start feeling like a countdown to a demand. If your nervous system interprets anticipation itself as a threat, then knowing something is coming, even something you want, can trigger the same response as danger. So if you have a history of trauma, it's crucially important to reframe scheduling sex as an opportunity for connection that doesn't have to lead to a guaranteed outcome, as I've mentioned earlier. So what you can do if this is the case is to set aside the time and start with non-sexual touch, or just talking, or simply just being together, and then let your partner know if you feel up for more. But no matter what happens, just making the time for intentional connection shouldn't be viewed as a failure or seen as another rejection. What matters the most here is consent in the moment as the thing that actually decides what happens during your scheduled time. And if you do have a history of trauma, it's important to get more help with it besides just listening to my recommendations on this podcast. The process will work more smoothly and lead to more progress if you're assisted by a trauma-informed therapist who can help you implement this slowly and safely. Now, if you want to try scheduling sex, here's a framework you can use. First, decide together with your partner out loud what this time guarantees. It can guarantee time for connection, but it cannot guarantee arousal or intercourse or even having an orgasm. Second, build in an explicit opt-out that either you or your partner can use at any point without having to explain yourself. This can be a word you say or a phrase you say or even a specific type of touch that indicates to your partner that you need to pause if you are moving into sex and you're not quite ready for it. And third, start the time with touch that isn't goal-oriented. So don't jump straight to sex. Let your brain and body decide if it's ready for it or not. And then you want to debrief afterwards, but keep it short. Talk about what worked, what didn't, and what you would adjust next time. It could be helpful to think about this scheduled block like you're planning a first date. You wouldn't walk into a first date assuming a guaranteed outcome, so remember that as you're considering if scheduled sex might be helpful for you. So remember, scheduling sex isn't good or bad on its own. It's just another tool you can use. But it only works when you use it to create safety, and it fails when it turns into another performance test. Thank you so much for listening this week. And if you want to take a deeper dive on this or any of the other topics I discuss on this podcast, please head over to my website, risetointimacy.com, and book a consultation with me. You can also sign up for my weekly newsletter where I give helpful tips and insight into more of these topics. I appreciate you so much, and I can't wait to see you next week. Thanks for listening to the Rise to Intimacy podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, know that healing is possible and you don't have to do it alone. If you're enjoying the show, please leave a rating and review for us at ratethispodcast.com/rise. It really helps others find us, and I'm so grateful for all your support. You can learn more about my coaching packages for individuals and couples at risetointimacy.com. And remember, sex therapy isn't for people who are broken. It's for people brave enough to look beneath the surface.